The way we thought this we would do this is a little different from the way we did it last year, because there's so many of us. So as you know, we've broken the panels into two. So we're doing one today, and we'll do the second one at the press terrace tomorrow. And the idea is really to get everybody to be able to say a little bit about what the challenges they face in their festivals, and also to just introduce your festivals briefly when the mics come to you. And before that, I thought we will just have a quick chat about some of the politics that confront us and some of the challenges that confront us, and then I will come back to everybody in the audience, and I've got the list. So those who are there, we'll quickly have a conversation and then we'll move on. So. Primarily, as you know, here at the Jaipur Literature Festival, much of the challenge that Namita and I specifically look at, and less so for Willie, is the politics that surround our speakers who come and come to the festival, but also the politics of the city, the politics of the state, the politics of the center. And a lot of the times, it's not even anything to do with either the festival or the author or anybody presenting. It's about an external event that's happening. 5 years ago, when there was the elections in a neighboring state called Uttar Pradesh, we were affected. When the year that Salman Rushdie came, it's not that he hadn't come to the festival before, he had, and it had gone completely peaceful. But the reason we were affected again was because there was elections in another state of India, and that impacted everything that we did here. In another year where we had a big issue with Ashish Nandi, who said something about reservations with a particular caste, again the issue was that one of the people on the panel was planning to leave his job as a television presenter and go to another job, and he wanted to create a big sort of hoo-ha and broho to be able to profile himself. And then that played out with, say, the politics that was happening in the state, where a particular politician split from the then ruling party in anticipation of the next election, and that then impacted us. So I'm going to, really complicated. So I want to start with you, Namita. We know that festivals today, especially to a large extent, literature festivals, theatre as well, less so perhaps for dance, they get impacted, and we tend to be seen to be at the forefront as platforms for expression, for freedom of expression. Tell us, of course, please introduce your festival, and then tell us a little bit about some of the issues that you faced, and also how do you see this playing out? You know, it's not that the world is becoming any safer, any nicer, more empathetic. It is going to get, I suspect, way worse before it gets better. Therefore, what is our role as people who run festivals in this thing about being platforms for freedom of expression?
So I am I'm the co-director of the Times Lit Fest in Bombay, where we've had 8 years of a lot of fun. I co-directed with Bachi Karkaria, and it's been a really interesting exercise because, well, to a couple of things. Bombay's is sort of a apolitical city by and large. I mean, it really tends to be a little bit on its own trip. Having said that, there's no such thing really. And so we do find that on many different occasions, our festival has made a point and a statement and actually succeeded to, work against a lot of, forces that try and suppress freedom of expression. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I think the interesting thing in all this, I was just thinking about it, is that both Bachi and I, we sort of tread lightly, and so we end up doing what we do and bringing in what we want to bring in while no one's looking, as it were, and then it just happens, and it's fantastic. And I'll give you an example which I really consider a coup. So Rohinton Mistry, who is really one of the finest writers in India, had to face a really terrible experience of the right-wing party in Maharashtra, the Shiv Sena, just arbitrarily deciding to ban his books from Mumbai University. This was about 7 or 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, I'm not quite sure. And it was absolutely horrifying and embarrassing and terrible and unjustified. And it ended up happening, and they threatened to burn his books. And it was all over some like tiny little non-anecdote inside his book. Basically, they were just looking for something to get riled up about and get into the news about. Now, having a Lit Fest in Bombay and not being able to invite Rohinton Mistry is kind of absurd, given that he is really such a primary figure in Bombay's literary map. So Bachi and I decided to pull a coup, which was, it's a sad story, when the 2014 elections were happening and Shiv Sena was going around.
Shiv Sena is a local
right.
dominant party on the right, well, not anymore on the extreme right, but on the right of the divide.
Yeah, right enough.
With a lot of hoodlums, they're sort of ruled because they primarily seem to be a hoodlum party.
Yeah, so we decided that we were going to somehow or the other get Mr. Mistry to Bombay, to the Lit Fest. So when the young man who is the scion of Bal Thackeray, of this right-wing party, was going around electioneering and having these public forums all over the city, Bachi, my colleague, decided to attend one of them. And this particular one happened to be in a community of Parsis, which is the community that Rohinton Mistry comes from, the Parsi community. And so he was sitting over there on stage and talking about how much he loves Parsis and how much he loved Parsi food and how his favorite teacher was Mrs. Bharucha and blah blah. And he was sort of yapping on about this. And but she was sitting there and she said, "But just one question, sir." And she said that, the Parsis have been very offended by the way in which you all have treated Rohinton Mistry. So he said, "Arey, no, that was all created by the media, rubbish. We absolutely believe in Rohinton Mistry." And he sort of did a turnaround. And Bachi said, "Oh, so then would you be okay if we invited him to the Times Lit Fest? And this is in a public forum." And he had to say, "Absolutely yes, madam." And so we did. Well, before that, what we did is that we made sure that the local tabloid carried a front page piece saying that young Mr. Thackeray agrees to bring the Times Lit Fest, to have Rohinton Mistry back in the Times Lit Fest. So it was on record, on public record.
Hi, and I'm so sorry. I wasn't playing around. I was in another session.
It's Jaipur, it's okay, we understand.
Yeah. We got Rohinton Mistry to the festival. It was a really important political point to make. Apart from the fact that it was like a rare bird sighting because he doesn't do Lit Fest, but more than anything else, we brought him back into the city that he loves and he writes about, and he'd been so hurt by. And these are the kinds of moments which for me make it worthwhile doing the most nightmarish organizing of a festival.
So Namita, just going back, what's the responsibility of festivals today to be at the forefront of this, creating platforms for expression? And also, being silent, as we know today, is also being complicit. And I'd love to know when you're programming, how do you sort of ensure some of that?
So I think it's a given that this public forum has to be a place of, where things that can't be said outside will be said, and things that should be said must be said. Having said that, I don't think it should become the overriding factor in determining how we curate the festival. It has to cater to all kinds of interests and people, and I think it should really bring in as diverse, but politics is inherent in any intelligent discourse, I mean really, so it has to do that. And for example, the festival venue where we have our festival has the union, the labor union is a Shiv Sena union, and so they've decided that they cannot have Pakistanis be at the festival, which is one of the most absurd and frightening diktats. So we once snuck in 2 or 3. We brought them in, and then we didn't put them on the program. And their session was one of the most spectacular sessions. It was Salima Hashmi with Gulzar Saab, and they were talking about fairs, and it was really, really moving. And there were people there who really appreciated, hearing these voices. She's Faiz's daughter, Faiz Saab's daughter. So I think that in our own way, we have to do this. We have to, especially in times like this. But anyway, regardless.
Geoffrey, in Toronto, in Canada, is it different? I mean, how much does literature and the arts sort of present itself as being reflective of the politics of the moment? And how do festivals like you then address issues like that of the First Nation? This year at Boulder, Colorado, we had a writer coming out from the First Nations and who was extremely vehement and wanted to protest the fact that they don't get a platform back home as well because they are seen to be radicalized, and therefore how is their literature sort of given a platform?
Good morning, everyone.
Can you hear?
Good morning, everyone. We've asked a bunch of different questions here, so I'm going to answer. The other mic. Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear? I use this one. Hello.
Does this work any better?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Geoffrey Taylor. I'm the director of the Toronto International Festival of Authors that will be celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. I'm going to answer your question slightly differently. I mean, the festivals reflect what the community and what the readers are doing and thinking. So in relationship to your question with Indigenous authors, there is a clamoring for more Indigenous authors to be on our stage. The problem is publishers aren't publishing enough of them. So there's a great demand for it. But there's just not enough of them. But the fascinating thing is the acquiring editors are looking for them. So right now they're not there, but in 2 or 3 years from now there will definitely be more of those books made available. And the challenge we have in Canada right now is there aren't enough Indigenous writers. So the ones that I could list off their names are not many. And they're well received, but it's the same authors appearing at the same festivals, and so they're representing all the many different communities in a small way. You said something earlier that made me think of challenges we've faced in the past. And a number of years ago, there was a prestigious university located in Toronto that was doing a conference on Chinese publishing. So they were having publishers and Chinese authors come together, and they asked us if we would do a component at the festival, taking some of that and doing the stage at the festival in some way. So we said sure. I mean, it was 2 years out. We thought, yeah, we'll have lots of time to figure this out. And then we found out that the university was getting their funding from the Confucius Institute in China, which is government funding. So suddenly then the challenge became, is how are we going to express more on one side of the equation? So we had to get our own Chinese authors to be part of the package, because we really can't be presenting one side of a political story. I mean, we might be a bit more left-leaning in general in our presentations, but we certainly have to present at least both sides of an argument. We can't just be seen as looking at one side of an argument.
Ahdaf, you're of course at the forefront of much of this, of much of the fight for both freedom of expression, creating platforms, and also the pressure that somebody like you faces from all kinds of sides, as we've seen, and every year you deal with it somewhat differently. And our feeling, or certainly my feeling, because I tend to have to deal with the politics and the governments, not just in India but in different parts, that even when governments change, nothing actually ever changes. And it doesn't matter what it is. The minute somebody is in power, however much they avow that they're going to stand for whatever the freedoms are, the minute they're in power, all of that gets compromised. And perhaps you can just share a little bit about your journey and then address some of these issues that we're talking about.
Well, the festival that I and some friends created and ran for 10 years, and that I'm now handing over to the next generation, is a little bit at the extreme end, I guess, of what we're talking about, because it's PALFest, the Palestine Festival of Literature, and our idea was that I went to Palestine for the first time in at the end of 2000 for The Guardian to just do a quick report on the Intifada. And I went back in 2003 with taking my son, Omar, who's also taking part in this festival this year. And what I felt then, apart from all the political things that you can expect, what I felt was that people really, really were fighting to keep culture alive, and that they really wanted to be regarded as a part of the world culturally and to be involved in whatever conversations were going on in the world. So I was there to write a piece for The Guardian, but because I'd written books, I found myself being made to do literary events. And the reality of doing a literary event was that people would come from other cities that are very nearby, but where there's a checkpoint that they would have to cross. And I was very humbled by this experience. And I felt that that when people went through checkpoints to come to a literary event, maybe it would be nice for them to have more than just me there. So out of this was born the idea of taking a literary festival to Palestine and taking a festival that would bring in people from other parts of the world, so that, again, this idea of being part of an international event, an international conversation would happen. So we dreamed it up, we managed to get a bit of funding, we've always lived hand to mouth, we've never known whether we're going to deliver the next festival, because we're always sort of just, begging for money and giving 5,000 here and 8,000 there and so on. But we did it, and it grew, and it was, to just describe it briefly, we would take maybe 15 authors, or people who were like arts managers, people who ran festivals or who ran literary cultural spaces, and we would cross from the Jordan thing, we would cross Allenby. We always adhered to BTS, to boycott, divestment and sanctions rules, even though we didn't declare for them openly until 2012. But we always abided by them, so we would travel as Palestinians traveled. We would not travel, we would not use the privilege of being foreign to travel on roads that were only open to Israelis, or roads that were only open to settlers. So that's why we went in through Allenby, for example. And while our aim was that we would bring an event of international stature to Palestine, it also became very clear that what we were doing was we were giving a unique experience to the authors who came with us. We deliberately did not choose authors who had already declared for the Palestinian cause. We chose authors and cultural practitioners who would say, well, the occupation is wrong, but Israel is a democracy. Or the occupation is wrong, but the Arabs should renounce violence. That kind of attitude. And we would just say, come and do a literary event or a series of literary events in Palestine. And of course, once they were in the experience, they understood. I mean, you didn't have to even tell them anything. We were available to answer questions as they were asked, but not to force feed anything. And we made people available to them to answer their questions as well in optional sessions. A main thing about it was that it traveled. We didn't go and stay in one place. So every day, they would have an early breakfast, get on the bus, and travel to the next destination. So we did Ramallah, Jerusalem, Nablus, Al-Khalil, Hebron, sometimes Jenin, and so on. And that way, we were the ones to cross the checkpoints, not the audience. And also, the authors were able to see the merits as the author of a book that came out 2 years ago, and a brilliant young team that he's collected around him. And just to finish off, you say, you have a lot of, one gets it from everywhere. Well, of course, I don't go in on my Egyptian passport, I go in on my British passport, without which I couldn't have done this. Obviously, the Israelis don't like you doing this, bringing people in and traveling them around and so on. And as I said, they tried to stop us a couple of times. But also, there are the accusations of normalization from your own people, as it were. and particularly the radicals, that the accusation being that by taking people, by stepping through the border and agreeing to deal with the Israeli border police, through whom you have to go into the occupied territory, you are normalizing. And that is probably the most difficult accusation to take. But it is there, and it sort of surfaces every year, and is fortunately countered by other Palestinian activists who sort of try and stay out of that. But it's challenging, but it's interesting.
I'm going to share a story with you, but before that, talking about bizarre, I'm going to just go straight to Namita and talk about the time when we had Salman Rushdie coming and 21 organizations, Muslim organizations, protested that we invited him. And for us, the difficult thing here was that we wanted to protect the platform as a place for freedom of expression. That means Salman's freedom of expression. But at the same time, when we went into this meeting with these 21 different organizations, and this was a meeting that we finally had to broker outside of the formal process, and we knew that, 19 of those 21 organizations agreed to disagree with us, because we said, if you put pressure on us to rescind the invitation, tomorrow somebody will put pressure on us to ensure that somebody like you is not allowed at the festival. And the other 4 organizations wanted to kill, bomb, murder, etc. But, Namita, if you just tell them about how some of the conversation got lost in translation and how difficult it was for us to be able to turn that around.
I won't share all the conversations. They were too bizarre. But can you hear me? So I think we, as a festival, came of age that year, because we had invited Salman Rushdie 2 years before. He had come. We had had an absolutely wonderful time, and the local community had welcomed him. And here he was, and I had in fact warned Sanjoy and William. I had said, friends, this is an election year. Please, let's keep it a secret. Let's not announce his name, and everything will be fine. Because we knew that the government had pumped huge amount, not the government, sorry, that all the political parties had pumped money just to create any Hindu-Muslim kind of problem. So I said, just lie low. But Salman got upset. And he rang off Willie one night and he said, why is my name not on the program? And in the festival, I call Willie Bhaiya, means younger brother, and they call me auntie. So Willie and Sanjoy decided auntie is just being stupid, and so they announced it. And the next day I see everywhere, Salman Rushdie is coming to Jaipur. And it just escalated and escalated and escalated. And there was one point where I had to take the call, because we had brokered to, Salman said, I want to come. And there was a threat to his safety, to his life. We don't know how strong that threat was and how much it was manufactured. But there was a threat we had to take cognizance of. And so we had decided to have an interview with him inside the festival, on a television interview with Kurkalang. And then those people landed up. I can still remember about 60 of very fierce-looking people threw children off their chairs. They just gathered, they read namaz, and they said, this is a jihad. And I had to take the call, whether we were going to have, because they said you're not going to have that interview within the grounds of the festival. So I took the call that the safety of those people who had come here to listen to the speakers was more important to me than the call that at any cost we have that. I was criticized for it, but had any old person or young child or anybody who had come for a peaceful and innocuous purpose even possibly lost their life. So then we had the interview outside the festival. Because this is a small and enclosed space. Sanjoy and his team do wonderful things for exits, evacuations. We think of every possibility. But and I can tell you that the first time, I'm a fearless sort of person. But when I came out and I found an enormous mob of people, and I walked through them, it's the only time in my life I have no fear. because not fear for myself, but fear for everybody here. So that's when we gather people around. Thank you for listening. I hope there are some learnings in it. I don't know what the learnings are.
Paul, coming to you, in London is obviously this great melting pot of different communities, different nationalities, more so than many other parts of the world. And short stories obviously lend to much of that. As I said yesterday, I mean, one of the purposes that we feel the literature is most important for is breaking this fear of the other, of making sure that people stop fearing a people or a religion or a color that they don't normally look at normally. How do you, in your way with the Short Story Festival, sort of address some of these issues, especially in the heart of London, which, as all of us know, is really the heart of the arts world, very much like New York is now?
If I might go back a little bit before then, I mean, I come from Northern Ireland, and the first festival I founded was about, I think I was 21, and we founded a theatre festival called Armada in Ireland, and what we did was we took 3 young theatre companies from the north of Ireland and 3 young theatre companies from the south, and they were paired together one-on-one, and they had to tour together to get to know each other. And a lot of them, even though they had the same passports, they both were nationalists and Irish, had never crossed the border into the south of Ireland, and you know, you're never more than about 40 minutes from the border. But there was a hard border then, something that we're all worried was going to come back. And so they toured together. They were encouraged to share resources and set up connections for the future for themselves, because they were young companies and couldn't afford to tour without this festival. And so that was something that was artistically, they could do the plays about whatever they liked. I didn't want to interfere about what kind of plays that they brought. We did have some demonstrations just because we had the program come out, and one of them was about the issue of abortion, which at that point was illegal both in the south and in the north. And so that was before the play even started, you know. But I mean, that was something that really stayed with me when I came then to set up the London Short Story Festival. I wanted to let the festival be about short stories, and it's a form that's not celebrated in the UK. Whereas in Ireland, it's venerated, you know. So I said there's one short story festival in Ireland and only one in all of UK, and I really wanted to give a platform for this genre of writing that was sort of overlooked, and there weren't any live events going on for short story at all. I mean, lots for poetry, but none at all throughout the UK. So. When I had lived in London for about 20 years at this point, and the 2 things that I was most interested in, and try to organise within the structure of the festival, again rather than the content of people's work, was how do I, get people who can't afford to go to literary festivals in, and how do I make it diverse in terms of presenters and audience, and in terms of the writers, and I asked a lot of people about that, and what I think the statistics at the time were something like, in Europe, mainstream festivals, 3 to 5% were non-white participants, and I found that really shocking. So, you know, in our first year, I think we had 35%, you know, I mean, that we, you know, and then and also then in terms of trying to allow a space for people who could not afford tickets. First of all, we allowed young people in for free. Up to a certain age, we gave them free tickets to any events, not the classes, because we needed to make money on those. And so we were just kind of trying to find a way of encouraging young people, and then people who couldn't afford it, so the unwaged could apply for free tickets in advance. And then we had a space, it was in Waterstones, Piccadilly, which if you've been, it's an amazing building. I think it's the largest British shop in Europe. It's got 5 floors and a basement. And we took over the ground floor. So what we did was we asked authors to donate their time in this dedicated floor. for anyone who couldn't afford any events. So we had events running all day that authors donated to, knowing that they were giving it to people who couldn't afford the tickets, and free classes, and we also had like a replica of Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, where we had like a stage where you could get up and take the mic, and so writers who hadn't made it and didn't have books to sell, they could come and book themselves into a slot and read a 5 or 10 minute story throughout the day, to encourage new writers. But what we did was, with the diversity, what we found, rather like what you were saying, when you then look for writers, actually the publishers weren't publishing diverse voices, you know. So actually we really struggled to find a number of short story writers in the UK who weren't white, and this was astonishing to me, you know. And of course, when you're forced to look at something you investigate it, then I was actually quite shocked that I hadn't noticed. You know, because I was just reading the work inside a book. I wasn't looking at the picture at the back or thinking about any of those things. And you don't think about it unless you're made to, you know. And the other thing, I asked some organisations and from the Asian community and from the Black community, and they were saying, I was saying, how do I get? The other thing was, I was going to short story events, and I'm creating short story events outside the festival, and there were no non-white faces. And so I went to these organisations and said, what is it, do you not like short stories? And you know, you're not interested? And they said, well, here's a little thing you can do. They said, when in the poster that you have, this lovely big audience, and you know, in your Twitter feed and your Facebook feed, have a black person in it. And I was like, oh, what? Yes. And they were going, and I said, why is that? And they said, because then we feel like we're welcome. And then we feel like, actually, you know we exist, and actually this is something we might enjoy, and all things, just have us in the post. And it was just a revelation to me, you know, not having considered it before, and it made a massive difference. And we also, there weren't that many authors, non-white authors. I think there were only 3 with collections in the UK. And that was fascinating. One of them had 5 collections, and the other 3. But actually, what we then noticed was there were kind of gatekeepers and go-to people if you weren't white. And they were the only people getting work, and the only people whose work was getting published. And so we wanted to find ways of discovering other voices, and so we had to have events that were free and events where people could come along to try and meet authors that they'd never heard of before.
So gatekeepers is one of the things that I want you to all stick to. You wanted to say something.
Well, sorry, I was going to follow up on that. I mean, we face a lot of the same challenges. One of our funding agents is very keen that we reflect the diversity of the city we live on our stage. And again, the publishers, which are the gatekeepers, aren't always part of that program. So 2 years ago, we published our own anthology called Unpublished City, and there's 18 writers that weren't necessarily being represented by publishers. And it was shortlisted for a Toronto Book Award. I mean, we did it for the wrong, right reasons, and it became a stepping stone for so many, and many of them are short stories, so maybe I'll send you a copy. And it was so successful, we actually did volume 2 of Unpublished City this year. And so the writers are there, it's just they're not being given the opportunities to get onto a page. And it's yeah. Sorry. That's all.
Wow, that's a great example. Adaf, I want to come back to you before I open it up. You know, Namita talked about how do we as, I mean, our responsibility as festival people to also ensure the protection and the safety of our audiences. And we've seen this again and again, and you know, this is a debate that continues. Every time we invite somebody, we had Taslima Nasreen 2 years ago, and again, there was a whole huge amount of protest. We had people from the right, and there was a boycott by other authors from the left. In your case, because safety is one of the biggest issues that you face, how do you, or what is the responsibility that you take on for both the speaker who comes as well as the audience who comes to hear them?
Well, for the audience, we don't really, because they're living in such unsafe circumstances anyway, that coming to listen to, a literary festival is actually not endangering to them, or not more endangering than crossing the road or going to school or whatever, lying in your bed at night. So that's. But of course, but for the visitors, we do have a responsibility. But all we can say really is that we firmly believe that nothing. Look, because the authors that come with us are from the outside, and at the beginning they were predominantly white because we were seeking also to influence the Western media. They tend to be afraid of the Palestinians.
They are afraid of the Palestinians.
Yeah, they're afraid that something will happen to them inside the Palestinian territories. So we feel pretty confident assuring them that the Palestinians will not do anything to them. That's always turned out to be true. Sometimes I have to, I'm going to tell you a story, and this answers this, but also picks up on the idea about knowing the other, about festivals being partly about knowing the other. One young man who came with us, he was a superlative poet and narrative writer. His name is Adam Folds. He was like the golden child of the London literary scene for a while, won awards and so on. And he was told by a friend that he should contact us, and he did, and we really wanted him. Now, the thing about Adam, and I'm not betraying any secrets, he's written about it, is that not only is he Jewish, we've had Jewish authors, but his father's a rabbi, and they live in Golders Green. And he said, I want to come with you. And we said, great, terrific, come. So about a month before the festival was due to start, he would be emailing me. Like, he's in his mid-30s, but he has a Jewish mother. Jewish mothers are like Arab mothers, probably like Indian mothers. And so she was very concerned about his safety. And in the end I said to him, look, really, all I can promise you is that anything that happens to you will happen to me. I'm going to be right next to you. And so, I can't totally guarantee, but I can guarantee you that it'll happen to me as well. That's all I can say. So he came. Now, what happened was he came, and on the first day, he was just very pale, very reserved. He'd only sit in the very back of the coach, and he'd only talk to one of the two other Jewish authors who were with us. One was Will Sutcliffe, and the other was Gillian Edelstein, the photographer. And she'd been sort of broken in South Africa, so she knew the score. So day 2, he was still like that. Day 3, we went to Bethlehem, and he saw the wall and all that. First 2 days were Jerusalem. And we had to stop the bus so he could get off and be sick. And then I went and spoke to him when we were checking into the hotel, and I said to him, look, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, it's hard. And he said, no, I'm a poet, and our business is the truth, and I might have never known the truth. Or the truth might have come up and bit me in far less congenial circumstances, so I'm happy to be here. He said, the first 2 days, I knew I was going to die. I knew I was going to be killed because we were in Jerusalem. And because when he was 18, he had gone to Israel on a sort of kibbutz thing, and then on a sort of, learning about Israel thing, and he'd lived in West Jerusalem, and he had known for a fact that if he crossed that road into East Jerusalem, he wouldn't survive. He was just clearly going to be killed. And so as we sat around in East Jerusalem and did our events and all the rest, he was just waiting to die. And really, it was sort of by day 5, he was going around hugging people, And then he went and wrote a superlative piece that was published in the Jewish Quarterly, not the Chronicle, but the Quarterly, and that was really sort of similar to Zola's sort of, I have been there, I have seen, this is what it is. So, so basically, there's a risk, and there is hardship, because you do have to, we cross the checkpoints, they have to carry their luggage, they have to go through the horrible revolving steel things. So there is hardship, there is a little bit of danger, but I think people tend to think that's okay and it's worth it.
Boycott has become such a strong movement, and there's a huge boycott of Israel, and there's a boycott of anybody who engages with Israel, and yet we found that we used to do a festival in Jerusalem, in the heart of Right Jerusalem, which is the Mishkanot Shenamin. And we took authors from India, and we talked about issues like partition here, and therefore we brought in authors, both the Arab authors and the Israeli authors, to talk about their perspective of it. And it was so interesting to hear people like Eliamir talking about how when he and his family first came to Israel, how they were discriminated against, or the head of the Israel Cinematheque saying that, I don't know what it's like to be persecuted, but as a persecutor, I know every day that I wake up and I see the sun, I just feel guilt beyond belief. And I stay in my basement office because I don't want to come out. And the people sitting behind me, there was two Air Force gentlemen who then tapped me on my shoulder and said, but they can't say this. They shouldn't be saying this. And then I forget the name of the author who talked about how he has always felt that persecution in the way that it's been done by the Israeli state of the Palestinian people or the Arabs is just beyond horrible. And his wife said to me, Sanjay, you have to stop him. And this whole outpouring of conversation really brought together, at least for the three, and they threw us out after that. They sued us, and I said something which I shouldn't have, usually.
But Sanjay, also one of the moving things which the Indian audiences here might relate to is that we had a Hebrew translation of Manto,
Yes.
of the partition story of Toba Takes. So it was just to...
And I think that's one of the questions that I'd love you all to reflect on, apart from the fear of the other, our responsibility as festivals, freedom of expression thing, is also the issue of boycott. And cultural boycott today is a very strong initiative worldwide. And when we used to do this festival in Israel, my son used to have the boycott movement against Israel for the arts in Hampshire University, where he was studying, and he used to call and say, how can you do that? I mean, I'm the one who's heading this and you're going ahead and doing this thing. And I used to say, but it's important for dialogue. The arts is the only way that you can bring people together, irrespective of the politics of it, and actually have a dialogue. Maybe it'll go nowhere, but we've seen that you can actually bring about change in perceptions and ideas and thoughts by this kind of conversation. I'm going to just go down the room now, just alphabetically, just to get a sense of your festivals, your ideas, some of what we've talked about. And just before that, on behalf of Namita, myself, Neeta, who seems to have cracked her ankle or her paw or something for some reason, Sam and all his colleagues, just to welcome you all formally to the JayapriyaVasudevan Festival. We're always very excited when we see the numbers of festival directors coming here. We believe that there is something that we can do together, sharing of ideas, sharing of experiences. We get calls all the time in terms of, can we help new festivals with, some ideas, etc. We're always happy to do that. Cherilyn, sitting here, has been coming to the festival for many years and taking back bits of information, and we'd love to share much of that with Bhopal also. Your colleagues have been calling me, and we've been very happy to be able to help. So I don't know whether AjitBaral is here from the Nepal Literature Festival. Ajit, share a little bit, because you again are at the forefront of so much of, and it's been quite a struggle. And let me tell you a quick tip, Mr. Noodle King, your Nepal's only billionaire, is going to be here for 2 days, so try to get some money off him. Use the podium.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Namaste. I'm AjitBaral from Nepal. I'm the director of Nepal Literature Festival. We started the festival in 2011, thanks to, it's the inspiration of Namita and Sanjay and AjitBaral. We used to come here, we have been coming here since 2009, and basically we were inspired by JLF, and we wanted to do a lit fest of our own in Kathmandu. As I said, we started the festival in 2011. We did the festival in Kathmandu for first 4 years, and then we moved the festival to Pokhara, which is the most touristy place in Nepal and most popular city in Nepal. Talking about the challenges, I can think of 2 challenges. One is funding, as all of you know. We don't have a big manufacturing base, and we don't have big corporate houses like in India, and it's always very difficult to get funding for the event. And we are barely surviving. We get little help from here and there, and I think we would have stopped running the festival long time ago if I wasn't a publisher. We see that we have our long-term interest in giving continuity to the festival, and that's why it's still in operation. And the other challenge is the lack of English writers in Nepal. We have very few writers writing in English. That means that we cannot invite many international authors to Nepal. So far, every year we invite around 7 to 10 authors from outside of Nepal, mostly from Southeast Asia. But one advantage of doing a lit fest in Nepal is that we don't have to deal with gatekeeping issues, because I think Nepal has the most vibrant public sphere, and even during the days of during the days of the takeover, the royal takeover, even the press was relatively free, and we don't have any gatekeeping issues until now. But things might change because now we have a very strong communist government in Nepal, which holds two-thirds majority in parliament, and there are signs that it might it is turning a little bit intolerant, and it's trying to suppress intellectual voices. And there was one issue recently. Our festival, the 7th edition of the festival, was completed last month, and the communication minister had pledged that they will support some money. That wasn't a big amount of money, around a little under $4,000, and we had a discussion on the constitution, which was formulated a couple of years back, and there were a couple of writers who were very critical about the constitution, and the session was live streamed on YouTube, and the minister saw the session, and he didn't want to give us the money that he had pledged earlier, and we don't think we'll get the money. So so I think that's the challenge.
They always try and control in some way or the other. But all our support for you, and whenever you need, happy to help in whatever way we can to be able to
thank
support.
you.
Thank you so much, Ajit. Can I ask Ajit or Anvita from the Patna Literature Festival, either of you, to come and say a few words? Thank you for being here, Ajit.
Well, I bring you warm greetings from Patna. I'm a cardiac surgeon by profession. I don't know how I got into this.
There's a lot of medical writing, really good best-selling books these days, so hey.
We started Patna Literature Festival in 2013 thanks to Namita, MitaKapur, and our friend Pawan Varmaji. And I run a small organization called Navras School of Performing Arts, essentially to promote Hindustani music. And under the aegis of it, we just started the Navras. We started the Patna Literature Festival, and we managed to go through it. It went all well. Next year, the government got actively involved in it, but thanks to Mita and Namita and Pavanji, we managed to pull it through again, and it went, actually. Our USP being we had 6 languages, etc., etc., etc. it never happened for the next 3 years. And the reason being, as I'll tell you, in 2015, there's an election year. The Sarkar sent a diktat, you have to do it, you have to do the literature festival. It's not a request, they sent me a memo, we have to do the literature festival. And it so happened that for reasons which was very political, we had to discontinue that because the then Mukhyamantri wanted his photograph on the invitation card, and Namita knows the whole story, it came out in the newspaper, and the culture minister. And I strongly objected to it. And I said, my organization is not going to be part of it. If you want to make it political, my organization is not going to be part of it. But the minister wanted to cancel it, and I went up, Urdu ki ek couplet hai, Bhagwan din se chamak ko ye dua deta hai, main rahu ya na rahu gulshan tera baag hai. Which means ki my presence, my organization's presence is not necessary. Okay? मैं पीछे से काम करूँगा, मैंने इसकी नींव बोई है, नींव बोई है इस पटना लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल की, it should pull through. But it didn't. All the authors were invited, tickets were done, they had to cancel it. Then there was a total lull for the next 3 years. This being an election year, I received a memo again from the government. Please give us a report on the first and the second Patna Literature Festival, and also why it didn't happen so. So
that was the new warning that they started in terms of restricting.
Yeah, so being an election year, I received an island here. So I said that, well, 2013, 2014 went well. If you ask me why it didn't happen, कमाल जलाली की एक शेर है, अब आगे इसमें आपका भी जिक्र आएगा, जो हुक्म हो तो छोड़ दूंगी इस फसाने को. And then I didn't hear anything. And then they told me, you just do the literature festival. And yes, we got this order 1.5 months ago. The names were vetted by the government 25 days ago. And I pleaded to Namita and Mita that, no, please help us out. 20 days is too little a time to do the literature festival. But hopefully, we'll do it. Yes.
Thank you. Well, best wishes. The one way to get out of the government's clutches is don't wait for them to tell you to do it. You guys should just do it on your own thing, even if it's small.
It would have been very difficult.
I know. I mean, when you said no, that was the year they called us. And then I told Namita, I said, what's the scene? And Namita gave me the politics, so we said, no, we're not doing it.
I also want to tell you that the first year, when I was sitting in the audience, I was not actively a part of it, but I was helping Ajit out and Pavan, and I was there as a writer. And the chief minister came, and he made this very strange statement, if you remember. He said, we hear that the Rajwada ke shehar mein festival ho raha hai. Patna mein kyun nahi ho raha hai? He was referring to the Jaipur festival. So all the government people really look at us as an example and have irritated both.
Is Anant Vijay here? Is Anant here? I didn't see him. Anant is again with the Dainik Jagran festival, which happened. Cherilyn, will you tell us a little bit about your challenges?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Cherilyn Parsons, and I'm the founder and director of the Bay Area Book Festival, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're based in Berkeley, and this topic is so relevant for me. I have a lot I can say about it. I first came to this festival, I think it was 2012 or 2013, before mine got started. The first year we had our festival was 2015. And what struck me most about this festival, even more than the crowds and the international, authors and the local depth, the depth of local programming, was how adventurous it was in terms of the programming. I mean, I remember this panel that had an Israeli author and a Palestinian author, and just different voices all brought together, and I really admired that and wanted to do that in the festival that I was creating. So. Berkeley is one of the most liberal cities, as is San Francisco, in the most liberal progressive state in the country, in the United States. And I have encountered a lot of resistance to programming any sort of right-wing or even conservative writers. There's a need for security. Berkeley itself, you've probably all heard about the free speech You know, Berkeley's sort of famous for free speech issues, you know, the launch of the free speech movement, and there was just another upswell of problems at UC Berkeley about a year and a half ago, where they wanted to bring in some real provocateurs from the far right, and there were riots, you know, things were shut down. The university ended up paying, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars for security and cleanup and so on. So here I am trying to program a literary festival on relatively meager resources. You know, I don't have the university's deep pockets to really bring in some of these speakers, but there's a desire to do that. So we've had to bring in some security, you know, for Black Lives Matter writers, you know, a couple of others, but I unfortunately can't be as adventurous as I want because the public is going to be so vociferous in response. It's a very activist community, very liberal, that it will cost a lot, and I have to really marshal my resources and figure that out. The other thing that's interesting about this political question is my staff. We're very politically correct in Berkeley, and there's been some pushback if I wanted to bring in a writer who is not of the same political persuasions as some of my staff. And I know that's like a question then of me educating my staff, and I think they get it theoretically, that we want to encourage debate, which is what I'm very committed to, but they have said that they don't want to devote festival resources to amplifying these certain voices. So I'm sort of getting this censorship from all different sides, from a funding question of having security, from a public perception of being upset at what we do. Even the city of Berkeley, I mean, they want to support diversity of viewpoint, but there's nervousness because this will also impact the city resources if I were to bring in someone who would be too controversial. And then I have the concern from within my own staff. So I'm so happy we're discussing this question. I'm fascinated by what all of you are doing in debating this issue.
Thanks, Cherilyn. In fact, I don't know whether you all know, so some years ago, of course, we always have this discussion, especially between William, Namita, and myself, where Willie says, oh, but that person has done this, and we then shout and fight. And a couple of years ago, Namita programmed 2 people from the RSS, 2 speakers from the extreme right, and they had accepted, and we were very keen that they find a platform. But a number of speakers then called for a boycott of the festival. And our thing was, well, if they're not going to come, then so be it, but the platform must be across the spectrum. And audiences must then understand and take away what they wish to. And it was so interesting because when they started speaking, because there's a lot of myths about what the right stands for or what the left stands for. And a lot of people sort of sometimes rationalize the extremes and say, you know, it's okay, it's only people like you who are the problem. And when they heard them speaking, that was when, at least in the audience, there was an awareness of what they actually meant and what they actually believed in. Very interesting, but boycott is obviously a very, very strong issue in all of us. Emmanuel or Isabelle from World Alliance of Samalo. It's a festival that we've all been waiting to go to, but for some reason, our dates never sort of coincide.
Thank you, Mr. Joy. Well, Namita, you've been invited a couple of times. You never came. Yeah. Well, our festival is in Saint-Malo in France, in the west of France, in Brittany. We'll celebrate soon the 30th anniversary. We invite between 200 and 250 writers every year. We have 300 debates, you see, also 150 films. The constant objective is to give voice and space to writers or filmmakers or artists, because we have also an exhibit of artists who see the drawings or paintings. Either were banned, you see, or silenced or threatened in their countries, you see. We'll have always in mind, you see, this famous phrase of Rosa Luxemburg: freedom is always the freedom of the one who thinks differently. And so we invite writers, you see, who can speak their own language, and they are translated, And also our festival is traveling. You see, we have set up an edition of our festivals in Port-au-Prince in Haiti, in Morocco, in Mali, in Congo, and then we're always in some countries to discuss the list of the writers, of the local writers, and we try to be, you see, very strict. We invite those we want to invite, and we have to sometimes debate with the governments. And also, I want to say that a couple of years ago, a group of 8 festivals, among them Jaipur, Toronto, Beijing, Melbourne, Edinburgh, New York, 8. We created what we call the World Alliance, a group of festivals who share the same values, and we put the freedom of expression as the first objective. Well, World Alliance has not been very active, but hopefully we'll start doing things together. Means to circulate writers, you see, and especially writers who cannot express themselves in their own countries. So hopefully next year we'll do something, because India will be in France next year.
In fact, I have a meeting immediately after this with the ambassador to talk about all of this.
Yes, and hopefully Toronto will be with us, we hope.
But perhaps, Emmanuel, one of the thoughts that we had is that in all of our festivals, and many other festivals can join us, we can all have at least a session which can be branded as the World Alliance session, where we talk about, where we present authors who are at risk, or whose voice is not being heard across.
Yes.
And we'd love to do that and join together in all our festivals, because if we don't start working together, each of us will, I mean, in America you feel the heat. Here you will feel the heat, irrespective. So perhaps that's something we should do together. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Jane McCredie from the Quantum Works Festival. So we should catch up a little, Emmanuel, at some point to just work this through.
So I founded the Quantum Words Festival in Sydney, Australia 2 years ago to create conversations around science, and in an attempt to bring the arts and science together, which I think is a very important thing. It's also inherently political in these days of alternative facts to talk about science and writing and creativity. I have a very strong commitment to representing the full diversity of Australian society in everything I program. So, for example, at the last Quantum Words Festival in November, there was a panel about writing the universe, where there was an astronomer, a poet, and an Indigenous writer who is writing about the Seven Sisters constellation, discussing how we can best understand the universe. And I've had a very strong commitment to representing Indigenous technology as part of the science conversation in that festival. I also lead an organisation called Writing New South Wales, which runs a number of festivals. And through that role, 2 years ago, we established the Boundless Festival, which is Australia's first festival devoted entirely to Indigenous and culturally diverse writers. And that too, I think, is inherently a political act to start a festival saying these are the only voices we will have at this festival. I think what people sometimes miss is that while disrupting the status quo is absolutely a political thing to do, supporting the status quo is equally political. So I think not doing that is also a political decision.
Well, silence today is being complicit. So if you're sitting back and not doing anything, then you are complicit. Thank you, and Namita and I have been very keen to share some of the science ideas with you, especially for JLF at Adelaide. So a conversation at some point. I don't know if Janhavi is here. I didn't see her. This one. It's my glazing over. So Janhavi set up a festival in Nainital, up in the mountains. She also has a version of it in Corbett, in Kumaon.
So hello everyone, I'm JanhaviPrasada from Himalayan Echoes.
Janhavi, just a sec, just to set the perspective, and I think this is important. So many of us feel that politics and the arts, etc. Janhavi comes from a very strong political family, and what was interesting is the fact that they were very interested and vested in many ways in the arts. And
yes, I'll give you a background about that. So Himalayan Echoes is set in the hill station. It's a lake district up north in Uttarakhand state. The place is called Nainital. It's pristine, it's beautiful, with the mountains, birds, lots of forests. My ancestral home happens to be there, which my great-grandmother, who was the niece of Rabindranath Tagore, she bought it in 1903. And I think that sensibility of art, culture, literature came into the household with her. And there was a gap in the middle with that, because my past generation, we were busy politicking, and working, doing our social work in the villages and all that. So that sort of took a back seat. In came me into the family, and I decided that I do have an interest in literature and music, and why not bring it back into the fold of the family. The house is about 140 years old, crumbling now because everybody's gone their way. So we decided to open it to the public and create a space up in the mountains for art, culture, literature and wellness. And that's how the Literature Festival came to Nainital. And the person who mentored and guided me, like most of the people here, was NamitaGokhale, and she happens to be a Nainital girl herself. So that's Himalayan Echoes. It's a 3-year-old festival. I'm almost a baby. We've not really felt the heat that JLF faces every year. We started with an audience of 70 people, and last year in October we had an audience of 300. So I think in that sense we are a small festival. We are still sort of taking baby steps, and that's why we're not really in the eye of the storm at the moment where the government is concerned. And consciously also I feel that because I come from a political family, it's my sort of domain where this festival is being held, so I have to be even more aware about the responsibility that I have in terms of not creating any stir as much as possible. But if anything has to happen, different mindsets have to come and create a ruckus. I don't think so. We have control over that, because ultimately the platform is for freedom of speech, and it can go either way. So I fully support the stance of freedom of speech, but as all of you, all of us over here, we are responsible, we are like-minded and balanced individuals, and we understand what's good for us and what's not, so we balance those things and welcome all sorts of dialogue. So last year we had the Tibetan Prime Minister come and do the opening session for us. And they were celebrating 60 years of Tibet in India.
This is the Tibetan in exile in India.
Dr. Lobsang Sangye. And yes, and Nainital has a large Tibetan community living there, so we invited him to give the keynote address. It went off really well, there were no controversies, but at the back of our mind, especially Namita, because she's much more experienced in all this, we were worried that, if journalists are always looking for a good story, there's got to be some controversy, and that's how your festival sort of is in the news. So luckily nothing really happened, but we were wary about it, that it can go either way. So that was one thing. Then there was Shobha Day, who all of us are very aware of. She's very vocal about her ideas, about the present regime that is in power. And she's got into trouble many times for being very open about her ideas on Twitter and other social media platforms, so much so that she has to have security with her and all that. So she was there, and the Me Too had just broken then, so Tanushri Datta was all over the place, and she expressed her opinions, and again that also went off. So so far as I said, because we're a small festival and the government is not really involved in it, we sail through really easily. But yes, as the numbers are growing, my concern is that how we are going to sort of meet up with the challenge that all of you are meeting up with. And yes, and we did decline the support of the tourism ministry, because like the gentleman from Calcutta, I mean, I just don't want a letter coming every other month saying now put in these authors, and it has to be done well. It has to have all sorts of mindsets, but in a balanced manner. So that's where we are with that.
Vetting of authors by government is really the big no-no in all of this. Jayapriya, from the Times Literature Festival.
Good morning, everybody. I feel a bit of a fraud. In my day job, I work as a literary agent, and I ran the Times Lit Fest for 2 years. I ran the Times Lit Fest for 2 years. It went really well, but I think that we had ideological problems, and I think that with all the ideas I take away from here, I'd like to run my own festival, maybe next year, maybe the year after. But quickly jumping in, because I know the Oscar music will play, quickly jumping into challenges I had. So I believe in discovery, I believe in new things. So I try to make the festival a space not just for marginalized voices, but also for debuts. I think debuts get really bad rap in most literary festivals. You need to hear new writers all the time. And as an agent, I work with new writers. So I brought that into the mix. So last year we did this crazy book set in Pakistan called Austanistan. It's an anthology, like a homage piece to Jane Austen in Pakistan. It was fantastic. I couldn't get any visas. We begged them. So what we did, I said, okay, let's turn it on its head and let's look at it like, we're high-tech city, we're Bangalore. Let's, Skype with them. So we got 3 members of Austanistan sitting in Pakistan. We got a young activist writer called Gurmehar who lost her father in this, sort of the clashes at the border. And I asked her if she could be the person on the India end speaking to the Jane Austen girls. It moved everybody to tears. We had a great audience, but I did have a band of people waiting for me near the stage protesting. So I walked up to them and I said, as festival director, it is my job it is my responsibility to deal with the problems that any festival brings me. So I went there and I just stood in front of them and I said, I'm sorry, but it's important that we gather together. And Gurmehar was wonderful. She said, it's just a wall that separates us. It's just a border. We are the same across. And I accidentally spoke in Tamil, which could have gone either way, because in Karnataka, they speak Kannada. I speak really bad Kannada. But somehow, in that band of people was this Tamil, I think, aspiring writer. So he just stood in front of me and he said, okay, we won't do anything, but you shouldn't do it again. I said, I'm really sorry, I won't do it again. And I walked away. So that was one, just how do you sort of break these barriers of politics, which will always come our way. And the second one is funding and sponsors. I don't think anybody's brought that up, but the conditions that sponsors bring us. So we had an Italy batter company which says, I want 3 writers to please use ID batter at the literary festival, seriously. So again, wearing my agent hat, I went to 3 of my writers and I said, okay, do it for the cause, do it for the love of literature. I said, come to the stand and hold this bag and say, I love using ID batter, and they did. Because I said, we don't have money.
You could have solved it in the section. Nobody would have, that wouldn't have been a problem at all.
They had a stand, but they still wanted for their website to have writers endorse them. And I thought there was something terribly sweet about it, that you have a food company and you want a writer to endorse you. So yes, the challenges that come at you are political, they're ones of language. So the Kannada writers, I try to be inclusive, I put them with other writers. So you're a novelist in Kannada, let me put you in a panel with other great novelists. Then I got a call from the Times of India, we need to have a meeting, emergency, come right now. And no, we need our own space. So I said, but this is an English language festival. I'm being inclusive, I'm being nice, I'm trying to say, let's all work together. But finally, I had to give in. And I think that's been my problem with running a festival for somebody else, but I have to constantly give in, and I don't quite understand it. So yes, the dream is, I'm going to call a few people in this room, but the dream is really to run a festival, a small festival, almost salon-like, where you give voice to, sort of unsung voices in a sense. But it's been great being here. Thank you. Fraud hand going away.
Thank you so much, Priya. And just to say, when we had Gurmehar Kaur, I think a couple of years ago, last year, one of our major sponsors and supporters sort of called me one day and said, Sajjava! And I have my flared nostril movement when I go, so they immediately back off, and that's what you have to do. You have to you have to stand firm. And people on the other side tend more times than less to actually, once you stand firm and they feel that they can't push you, they're okay with it. Of course, distant, yeah. But that's the national narrative of the time. Love to have Mary Kurkalang from the Northeast Festival, which is for many of you who may not have been to Northeast is, particular isolated part of our country, more recently coming together, but people from the rest of India look at the Northeast somewhat differently. So doing a festival, I'm sure, has been hugely challenging. Mary.
Thank you, Sanjoy. So I used to co-direct a festival called the Cultures of Northeast, or Cultures of Peace Festival of the Northeast, with my co-director Preeti Gill is also sitting here, and I did that for 3 years along with Preeti. Since then, this festival was a festival of the Northeast across arts and culture, and we had done it in over 5-6 cities. Not in the Northeast, but outside of it. I think that festival really made me question my role in terms of what I am representing of the Northeast outside of the Northeast, and what is the Northeast. And since in the last 3-4 years, I have now been collaborating and working with different governments, individuals and organizations within the Northeast to facilitate and try to bring in those connections that I have learned from working from the outside, because I've worked in the mainstream, so to say, with international cultural organizations and publishing houses in Delhi and internationally, and trying to bring those connections into the Northeast. And what I found is also that there is a very, very large economy of festivals in the Northeast which is sponsored by the government and large organizations. But how can you have festivals and showcase when you haven't actually invested in process and infrastructure for the arts? So what I've been doing in the last 3-4 years is actually what I call guerrilla programming. I've been doing workshops in prisons, in law schools, working at translations. We've taken contemporary dance pieces which is questioning sexuality, 377, into people's homes, gardens, basement. I've just commissioned a theatre piece which is looking at right now a burning issue in Meghalaya on the mining issue. So that's being developed at the moment, and we just had a first showcase of it last week. So yes, that's what I do, and I basically am a person who, I call myself an enabler and a facilitator, and I work with everyone across the region and internationally, and a lot in the Northeast. Thank you.
Any pressures, any challenges or pressures?
Lots of pressures. There is so many. So right now I'm involved a lot in Manipur, in Assam, and in Meghalaya. 3 very different. So one is also that when you say Northeast, outside of the Northeast, and actually only in one city in all of Northeast, the 8 states of Northeast, where people identify as Northeastern, and that's only in Guwahati where I found that. There's nowhere else in the Northeast we refer to ourselves as Northeasterns. So just that to be seen also as individual states and very different issues in each state. So I think that whole problem and we are a region where there's over 200 plus languages. So how do you represent all of that? And there's a lot of representation of the Northeast outside and also in literary festivals. But again, this thing of the gatekeepers, who do you go to when you want to find out about Northeast? And if you're going to the publishers of English in Delhi, you're not finding out enough. There's only that number of people who are writing in English. So I think at many levels, so it's also access points, who gets showcased, who's represented, how much can you represent. So yeah, all of this is pressures, and also of course, if you're working in a state like Manipur, it's an everyday pressure. So I'm actually involved with a group of 8 artists across, from a bookseller to a contemporary dancer who's coming together to start a festival in the state. And we've had to face, within 5 days of just planning the festival, one fine day we wake up and we find that none of our cell phones are working. It's a curfew in the city, there's a strike. And so we live with that, and we also plan with that sort of in mind. Whereas, of course, in Meghalaya, it's very different. There are lots of subjects that we still can't talk about. So when we're talking about, at the moment, we're doing things in the mental health space, and you will never find a single condom ad in all of Meghalaya because of the high presence of Christianity. So therefore, there's a lot that's censored there as well within. So yes,
Manipur, for those of you who don't know, is at the front line. There's a great deal of unrest. It's a border state, and the politics of it is very complicated, and there's always warfare on both sides, and there's also a very draconian law in which the prevailing forces can sort of pick up anybody for anything that you say. So the fact that you're doing what you're doing, amazing, and again, much support, all support. Meenakshi, love you to say a few words about your work. You've been consulting for festivals in the Toronto area and other places.
Hi, I'm Meenakshi. I'm going to read. I don't know what talking to say. So I guest curate now. Oh, sorry about that. I'm the guest curator for the South Asian segment of the Toronto International Festival of Authors, which came about with Geoffrey and me networking here last year. As you know, it's called, thank you for giving us a platform here. Safar is what the panels are called. As you know, Toronto is the most diverse and multicultural country in the world, and particular Toronto is. And it has a very large South Asian demographic. This was the first time that TIFA had two dedicated South Asian panels, which were a huge success. I programmed both Canadian and international South Asian authors whose countries of origin included Bangladesh and Nepal. Both panels had a great response. As a consequence of this, the South Asian segment will be a part of TIFA in 2019 too. My challenges was reaching out to this fragmented diaspora, because everybody tends to self-polarize themselves. The Bangladeshis will not come out to an Indian festival, and the Nepalese will not, and the Pakistanis will not. So my challenge was to bring them all together to Safar, come and experience literature, experience the diversity, and expose each other. I mean, sometimes one community, the Punjabis, do not know that the Bengalis are writing, and so this was wonderful. And also I wanted to bring genres in, like theatre, which we successfully did, politically driven, motivated theatre, from other countries other than India, which I wanted to get in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and we did that very well. So, TIFA is celebrating its 40th year, and I look forward, as Geoffrey and I have decided, I'm coming back this year, and I'm so delighted to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi. I don't know, I didn't see NirupamaKotru in the room. I'm assuming that she hasn't come. I wanted her to speak just in terms of the government perspective of what she was doing. Prashasti, do you want to say a few words? Juergen is not here. Where's Prashasti? Has gone out as well. I thought she was here. Oliver, is Oliver here? Oliver.
No more broken legs. Hello, I'm Oliver Møystad from Norla in Norway. We normally don't produce festivals. We support authors who are invited to festivals. But as we now are guest of honor in Frankfurt, we are facing the joys and benefits and challenges of curating, which is wonderful. So we are, well, of course, what we want to do is to show the whole diversity of Norwegian literature and culture, with theatre, art exhibitions, concerts, film festivals, lots and lots of stuff. And of course, we want to show or present not only like the poster picture image of Norway with fjords and mountains, what everyone knows, but also the challenges that this country also is facing. With like things that, for instance, the challenges of the fish farming industry, which has huge environmental problems and problems with things with diseases in the fish. You have also the problem that we are a country that has been living very well off oil industry for the last 40 years. And how do you do that in a world with climate change? So It's kind of a challenge that we are called double faith. We want to present ourselves as an eco-friendly country, but at the same time we are one of the big polluters, creating the problems. So all these things, and of course the cultural diversity in this country, especially very important is to present Sami literature and find translators and anthologies and have the Sami writers coming as well, which will be, they will be there and it will be very good. So this is what we are doing right now and it is fantastic. But I also wanted to share with you, linking into what Cheryl was talking about with the controversies between the right wing and the politically correct, what you do when, where do the limits go for freedom of speech? So I saw last year there was at the literature, it's not the book, what's it called? In Gothenburg, in Sweden. It's not a festival, it's a book fair. Sorry, the book fair in Gothenburg, they have every year in September. It's very big, and there there was this right-wing, extreme right-wing paper that wanted to have a stand. So the festival decided that it's a legal paper, so they should have their stand as part of freedom of speech. But then lots of people, Sweden is like Berkeley, it's very politically correct. So lots of people boycotted the whole fair, and I think in the end there was a big controversy, and the part of the managers of the festival actually had to leave their jobs afterwards. And then there was, as part of creating more trouble, the neo-Nazis in Sweden had a demonstration, were allowed to have a demonstration on Saturday of the fair, and kind of the whole central Gothenburg was full of police and the traffic was blocked and it was just horrible. Luckily the demonstration was not very successful. Very few of them, but still it was a huge havoc. And then next year they did not let this paper have a stand. But the problem is, what do you do? Do you give these people who do promote hate speech, they do promote racism, they do promote the most horrible things, and they are against freedom of speech themselves. So what do you do with them?
But they have a license to publish, and that was they have a license to publish.
They do.
They're a legal newspaper,
Exactly.
and that was the big issue, because the directors of the festival, of the book fair, then said, but they have a right, and therefore he had to sort of resign at the end, because the rest of it, there was such a huge, swell movement sort of against the...
Yeah, but it's a problem we're all facing, I think, as this, well, they are rising.
So as Norla, do you all have a policy or a philosophy to support or not support people who may be offensive or may be writing work that's offensive to A community or B community, or philosophy?
So far we haven't been confronted with a concrete problem, but of course our general philosophy is that if a book is published in Norway and it is of a certain quality, we have this, that the state buys 750 copies of a book of a certain quality and distribute to the libraries. If a book is in this program, we will support it to outside Norway.
But who vets that?
Sorry?
Who decides which book to buy or not buy?
That is a board of readers who do that, who are appointed partly from the Writers' Union. So it's kind of literary people who decide this. It's not political.
Because in Egypt, this is what happened. The society of publishers, etc., were taken over at one point by a whole by people who were close to the present Sisi government, and then they stopped allowing any of these other books to be published or written, etc. So it became a big issue.
Exactly. Of course, we are not at all there. Of course, the government has a very arm's length distance to anything that's published. So we do have a what you would say freedom of speech. But of course, you never know when these problems arise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marieke? Marieke is from the Melbourne Writers' Festival.
Thank you. Yes, I'm from, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
From Melbourne Writers' Festival. It's a 10-day festival that happens at the end of August through September. Last year we had 400 events and 500 speakers, which was a lot. And that was my first year, so that was a bit of a baptism by fire. I was recruited specifically to broaden the festival's audience, and I think change the festival from a more conventional in-conversation festival to a festive festival, and we're kind of talking about it as a literary arts festival. So there's a lot more performance and theatre and music and songwriting. It feels like a 10-day party, which is what the board wanted the festival to feel, and what I hope that I brought to it last year. We had a huge response from the audience, so it was really exciting to see that come into the world. I think Cherilyn and you were making the point about programming conservative voices within a very left-leaning environment. And I do think it's very interesting in terms of, you're very protective of your festival. You don't want it to be a controversy in the newspaper. Ours was last year as well, which was a really horrific experience while the festival is going, because you're protective of this beautiful program that you've made. You're protective of the writers in it. In Australia, right-wing conservative voices have a very mainstream media platform as it is. So sometimes you think, well, those voices are not being silenced. So what is my responsibility to give them a platform? And then if you've got authors boycotting, if you've got authors in your program boycotting another author, if you have the public, if you have the media, what about the audience? I think our audience is very left-leaning. And a few years ago, before my time, Melbourne Writers Festival did program a very conservative, controversial politician, and it was a very hostile experience for everyone, including the writer himself. And I feel protective of everyone in that circumstance, and I think perhaps it's not the environment that I would want to put into the world in a festival, but it is complex in terms of dissenting voices. Do you put one in and therefore create a very uncomfortable room for everyone, including the writer, the audience, the people boycotting outside, the newspapers writing about it? That's really complex. This is sort of part of who you make a festival for, which is one of the questions that I faced a lot of pushback from publishers last year, because the great model for publishers is someone writes a new book, they go to a festival, they do an in-conversation speaking about that book, they walk off stage, they sign the book, which is a great model, and we've still got a lot of those events in our festival. But around that, we had writers writing their own eulogy and reading it at the festival. We had them speaking in an animal church, we had them getting literary tattoos. The writers had a great experience, the audiences had a great time, but I felt very responsible for the publishers who were going, well, how do we sell books? The books were still there to sell, but the model had changed slightly. So we're not making a booksellers festival. It's not a publishers festival. The festival is for readers, and the writers are readers as much as that. But I did find it challenging to say, who is this for? Oh, I didn't know if I was being played off then. So I think that's the challenge for me: is who are we making this for? If we're making it for the readers, we can challenge them. We don't want. Do we just make them distressed? Do we upset the publishers who are getting annoyed that the models change? So for me, that's my personal challenges over the last year.
Namita will share, but one of the things that at least we steadfastly hold true here is that we don't get necessarily pushed by publishers, and we keep our lists outside of which is the bestseller, etc. The lists get created, invitations go out. Yes, publishers do send suggestions and so on and so forth, but we tend to be pretty much hold the line in terms of that, and then you introduce new writing. I remember Sharad Paul, or I forget the name of the philosopher. Namita, what's the name of that? Michael Sandel. Michael Sandel, nobody had heard of him here, as nobody's heard about 80% of our writers, and their books sold.
And the other thing I find is that there are many fine writers who may not have a new book out, and that may be the best time to get them. Because in India, when somebody's got a new book out, they do every one of these 200 festivals. They are fatigued, tired, and boring, because they just come and vomit it out. Because they just...
And roughly the same thing.
And
they
so
say the same thing.
I'd love to do something a year later, when the book is still in circulation. It's
or
fun.
before.
Or
Or
even an old book.
Yeah. Is Pariksith Singh here? Pariksith, come.
Hello everyone, I'm a physician. I practice in Florida. I manage a multi-specialty group. I do management. I teach doctors how to practice medicine. And so I'm here. As an outsider, I love literature. I've been writing.
It's the best place where money meets the arts. The good bridge.
Yes, that is actually good, because the way I got introduced to this was I was asked to sponsor a literary festival in Pondicherry, around August 15th. Pondicherry is a place that's very close to my heart. So if someone invites me to Pondicherry on August 15th, I go there. This is the first time I went there, and in the meanwhile, I was asked to sponsor the literary festival. And being an outsider, I had no idea 4 months ago that I was going to be part of 4 festivals within 4 months. And at that time, my books were coming out, books on medicine, 2 books of poems, one in Hindi and one in English. So, and I was asked to get them released, so I brought them there. Being an outsider, I came, I had no idea about the politics, and that's where it becomes interesting. I was branded immediately a right-winger by...
So just the background, so Pondicherry, the festival was in a sense put together by, or at least motivated by the governor, the lieutenant governor there, who represents a particular party ideology. And all of the speakers, as it happened for whatever reason, were pretty much from the right of the divide.
That's right, and they made some mistakes. They got it branded because it was organized by some people who were identified with the right side. Me, coming from a completely confused background of absolute libertarianism and Green Party activism, so I'm not sure which side I am on often.
The right now.
So I was, Le Monde, which is a French newspaper, branded me as a right-winger. The DMK came against it, and the Alliance Française at the last moment cut them out, pulled out, so they was moved to another place, Sri Aurobindo Society. And I was there, it was a new experience, and there were some great speakers. One of them was here yesterday, Mr. Vivek Delloye, who's a genius, absolute brilliant man. You could listen to him, and I don't think he's right-wing or left-wing. He's just trying to speak the truth the way. Yes, he's a brilliant man. Then I was invited to another festival 2 months ago called the Jaipur Literary Dialogues. And that's when we met. I met Sanjoy. It was a great meeting. And so what I see from outside is all the perceptions about JLF. And that, when I came in, even yesterday, I came in with a lot of different perspectives that had been fed into me. By the way, now I'm a left-winger because I'm helping another festival which is happening in a few days, and I spoke to Sanjoy about it. We started our own platform called Kavya, which promotes writers, poets, translations, new writers, bringing the humanities and arts together. And so we really don't care about which side you're on. Are you trying to explore the truth? Are you going deep within yourself, trying to find something that is of value to others or to you, something that's beautiful? And so in that perspective, without knowing, because these were my father's friends, who is from this city. By the way, this is my city, this is my festival. I'm from Jaipur. And so those roots, his roots from the left, he's from the left, from Congress, and part of the establishment now. And so these people we were supporting, so now I'm branded left. But the perspective that I came with yesterday, I would say the charges against JLF are perceptions from each side which are colored. And now I've seen the good part of it, the beautiful things that are happening here. And I think that's what we need to bring out. What you have done about it is you've brought literature, languages to the young ones, the youth. That's exciting. Now there's a lot of chaos around it, which is okay, that's okay. Some people can get disturbed about it. There's a festival-like atmosphere, but that's okay too. Because at the core of it, there is something beautiful. And if we can keep the youth engaged in something beautiful and exploration and writing and sharing, then amazing things have been done. So that's my impression. I would love to do something in Florida now, and we can work together. And hopefully I can continue this message that you guys have brought here. Thank you.
Thank you, Pariksith. I don't know whether you were there in the morning yesterday, but what I'd said was that 80% of our 500,000 footfalls is below the age of 30 here, 80%.
That's
so that's
absolutely
unusual for any festival across the world. And Pariksith was very sweet. He suddenly called, he sent me a message saying that, do you mind if I broke a peace between you and the parallel festival? And I said, we've never fought with them. Unfortunately, they sort of set it up saying that we are not JLF. And I said, we are happy to support you. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're not JLF or with JLF or hate JLF, whatever it is, that's your cause, but we're happy to support you.
No, we tried, and hopefully it'll happen someday.
They are all our friends.
Yeah. So they were serving, and they said something beautiful. So there is something good there. They said, we have the same mother. I said, who's that? The language. I said, then what's the problem? Then what's the problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Pariksith. Praveen Sharma from the Indoor Literature Festival. Is Praveen here?
Namaskar. I should say JLF is a catalytic agent for many literary festivals in India and maybe abroad. So I personally took inspiration from you, and last year I came Jaipur, and I learned a lot. Many of our team members came here. So we started Indoor Literature Festival in 2015. Last December we organized 4th edition of Lit Fest. Descent is okay, but literary fests are meant to be delight and enlightenment of our minds. Yesterday only Guljar Saab said, Bittu Rani Bose ki boon giri hai os ki. If one line a student from 11th standard or maybe in college graduate took from the festival like this, I think festival purpose is fulfilled. When you organize festivals, there will be dispute. In our debut edition in 2015, just after the inaugural session, there was keynote speech by Tariq Fateh from Canada. And Pakistani authors boycotted it when Tariq Fateh commented something against Pakistan. So there are disputes. Last year, Chitra Mughal said me that if you are inviting Anupam Kher, how should I share a stage with him? Naresh Saxena, a poet from Hindi, great poet, told me 2 years back when then Chief Minister was supposed to come in an inaugural session, and he says if Chief Minister will join the session, I won't share the stage. So these are the things. It will be happen. ऑलवेज होती रहेंगी ये सब चीज़ें. मैं अंग्रेजी में उतना वो नहीं हूँ, लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि असहमतियाँ जारी रहेंगी. हमारा मुख्य उद्देश्य सहमतियों के अलावा जो साहित्य का मूल उद्देश्य है उसके साथ हो, जैसा कि अभी परीक्षित जी ने कहा. और नमिता जी और संजय जी आप बहुत बड़ा काम कर रहे हैं. और जब मैंने पहली बार संजय जी आपसे बात की थी तो आप लोगों ने बहुत प्रोत्साहित किया था हम लोगों को, किसी भी काम के लिए किसी भी वक्त आप हमसे बात कर सकते हैं, और हमने आपसे कुछ सलाह ली भी है. मुझे लगता है कि 2-3 चीज़ें हो सकती हैं इस बीच में. फंडिंग को लेकर जो कि प्रॉब्लम हम सब फेस करते हैं, हम भी फेस करते हैं. जैसे एक इशू बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग था कि हमने जब पहली बार फेस्टिवल किया तो सरकार से हमने कुछ मदद ली थी और सरकार ने मदद की भी थी, और उसके बाद फिर हमने तय किया कि हमको सरकारों के पास मदद के लिए शायद नहीं जाना चाहिए. तो उन्होंने एक अधिकारी ने, मैं नाम नहीं लूँगा, उन्होंने कहा कि साहब ये फला कवि जो हैं इनको आप हटा दीजिए अपनी लिस्ट से. मैंने कहा सर वो तो हमने इनवाइट कर लिया है. बोले नहीं, अब जो भी है पर हम आपको फंडिंग तभी देंगे. और हमको बहुत ही खेद के साथ उनको बाहर करना पड़ा लिस्ट से बुलाने के बाद भी. तो हमने जो माफ़ी मांगना थी उनसे व्यक्तिगत रूप से मांगी. पर ये इशू आते हैं. मुझे लगता है कि हमको अगले साल आप लोगों को एक सजेशन है मेरा हम्बल कि आपको फंडिंग को लेकर एक सेशन एक अलग से इस तरह से करना चाहिए. और चूंकि JLF एक इतना बड़ा ब्रांड है और इतने कनेक्शंस हैं आपके ऑथर्स के साथ, खासकर पब्लिशर्स के साथ भी, तो क्या हम JLF या इंदौर लिट फेस्ट या और भी बहुत सारे जो दुनिया भर के हैं, क्या हम वो सेशन पर्टिकुलर, मान लीजिए मैं संजय के किसी संपर्क से किसी एक ऑथर को बुला रहा हूँ और मैं इंदौर लिट फेस्ट में वो कहूँगा कि भाई ये सेशन प्रेजेंटेड बाय जयपुर लिट फेस्ट, या नैनीताल से यदि कोई सपोर्ट कर रहा है तो वो उस तरह से किसी न किसी का कोई ऑथर के साथ कनेक्शन. इस बार हमने एक नया प्रयोग किया कि बच्चों के लिए भी सेशन जोड़े इंदौर पे. रस्किन मॉन्ट का एक सेशन हमने नमिता जी केवल स्कूल के बच्चों के लिए किया. 1000 के करीब बच्चे हमने इनवाइट किए 20 स्कूलों से, और वो कोई 2 घंटे का सेशन चला, बहुत ही ज़बरदस्त सेशन था उस तरह से। तो ये यूथ को भी, नई पीढ़ी को जोड़ने के लिहाज से हमने वो कोशिश की थी।
So just to sort of translate, it said that there are challenges that everybody faces, and with them a particular incident happened where they've taken money from government, from the government of the times in MP, and they didn't want a particular writer poet to actually be part of the festival, and they'd already invited him, but because of the fact that there was so much money at stake, they then disinvited the poet, and they apologized, but it became a big issue for them. And his suggestion is, one of the things that haven't been discussed about is sponsorship, and how festivals actually, I know with Cherilyn we've had many conversations about this, and maybe next year we will look at doing a session around that. And his other suggestion was that why don't bigger festivals like the Jaipur Festival then do a session, or in whether it's in Indore or Bhopal or whatever, which is branded as that, and then support the festival, and we certainly have a look at that. And thank you.
एक साल पहले हमने तस्लीमा नसरीन को बुलाया था, 2 साल पहले, तो हमने उसको डिक्लेयर नहीं किया सिक्योरिटी रीजंस के कारण से, जैसा कि हमने उसके ठीक 1 साल पहले सलमान रश्दी के मामले में जयपुर में देखा था। लेकिन उसके बावजूद बिना डिक्लेयर किए केवल हमने DIG को इन्फॉर्म किया था, और मुझे जानकारी थी, मेरी अपनी टीम को भी जानकारी नहीं दी थी। उसके बावजूद लोगों ने उस सेशन को बहुत एंजॉय किया, सिक्योरिटी की व्यवस्था हमने रखी थी, लेकिन सेशन को लोगों ने एंजॉय किया। हज़ारों लोगों ने हमसे अगले दिन शिकायत की कि हमको पता ही नहीं था कि तस्लीमा उस पर। तो ये भी हमको प्रयोग करना पड़ेगा, और दिक्कतें तो आएंगी और हमको फेस करना पड़ेगा।
He just at the last instance of Taslima Nasreen, when they invited her, they didn't publicize it, and the session went out really well, but a lot of people then said, why didn't we know about it? The other thing is that, one of the problems that we have is sometimes authors or speakers use this platform for their own purpose, for their own publicity, and that puts us. I think I have 1 non-bailable warrant and 3 bailable warrants because of a group of speakers who used our platform to, at that point of time, perhaps garner publicity. They leave, we get left with some of the legal.
And my son-in-law has to look after me.
Behind it. Preeti Gill from Maja House. Preeti.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Namita, and thank you, Neeta, who's not here, but for having me here today. Maja House is, of course, a completely new, absolute baby, younger than yours. So we just started in March last year, and it's not a festival. So Maja House is a space, and the first thing I'd like to say is that it's a private house. It's the home of my...
Perhaps you can say which city as well.
Amritsar, yeah, sorry. It's in Amritsar in Punjab. And the idea of starting it at a home was basically that we wanted to open up this space, which is a private space, which has remained a private space for the last 40 years when my in-laws lived there, to now make it into a public space. So we've opened the house, and we've opened the lawns and the annex that goes with the house, and opened it up to the public. So we have 2 festivals, one in the spring and one in the summer, in the winter, which is what we did last year. And we have the Basant, the summer festival, coming up now again in March. So the thing is that it's also being used as a space where we have events, where we invite writers, where we have debates and discussions, performance, music, art, film. We've opened up a small book cafe which has a library. We are also trying to do lots of events for children and trying to get in people to come in and start reading. Amritsar is actually a food city. It's never been known for reading. It doesn't have a bookshop. It has only one bookshop, which has been there for at least the last 40 years that I've been visiting Amritsar. Nothing more has opened. And I think at Partition, for example, among the many things that were lost, lives and everything else, was also this whole culture, this whole idea of a city having a cultural soul. And a lot of people feel in Amritsar that most of that went away to West Punjab, which of course went to Pakistan. And what was left behind is a trading center and people who were mostly traders and businessmen. A lot of literature, a lot of poetry was written here. The Sufis wrote a lot here. Many of the big names that one hears, the songs, the poetry came out of this very land, but it seems to have been forgotten. And when you think of Punjab now, it's basically guns, and you think of really terrible music, and you think of loudness and this kind of crass kind of writing. So I think it's also an effort to give a space and a platform to people who want to experiment and want to bring in something more and something else. So that's how it all started out. And having been in publishing for more than 25 years, and now I'm an agent, obviously the only thing I have is writers. So those are the people I started with, and those are the people I started calling here. And so the first festival last year in March saw about 200 people coming. And for me, that was a huge achievement. Not only that we accommodated them in the lawn, but also the fact that we got 200 people in Amritsar to come and listen. And the stories and the things that engage them are obviously things that concern them. So they come out of the land, of the local ethos. So partition is a big thing still because the border is just 35 kilometers away. It's a living thing for them. Everybody lost something or has a story. And everybody connects with that, and everybody also wishes somewhere that things were better and we could go across and they could come across to us. So partition means, it's a living thing for them. The same goes for 1984, which was a very bad time in India. We saw the massacre of 3,000 plus Sikhs. 84 was a watershed year in many, many ways in this country, and a lot of that was against the Punjabi, the Sikh community, and that again is a sore point, or it's something that everybody relates to and everybody talks about. So we had really good panels on both of these things. We had people who had reported on 1984, for example, like Mark Tully and Satish Jacob and Hartosh Bal and people like that. And when that session finished, I found 3 or 4 women actually standing near the gate. They'd left the space where the conversation was going on. And so I heard from them later that they were afraid that something would be said and it would create trouble and they would probably have to leave from there. Because again, Bhindranwale is this, I don't know what to call him, supposed to be a saint, but obviously was very political as well, and a very, very controversial figure in that entire period leading up to 1984, and the killing of Mrs. Gandhi. Bhindranwale is still a figure, to be, he's still respected, and you find his photographs and posters along with the Sikh gurus near the Gurdwara selling and all that. So again, these were very controversial things, but we did decide that we would have them on the table because that's the whole idea of trying to make a platform, make a place where people can debate and come from different sides and shades of opinion, but talk about it. And I think it worked very well. So we had another session which was on the role of the police again in 1984 because there'd been a lot of killings post that when all that terrorism and so on was going on in Punjab. What I want to say is that basic thing with trying to make Maja House is to bring the local problems or the local kind of concerns and crises that has engulfed Punjab even presently. It's a lot of
drugs. One of the issues.
Yes, drugs is one.
Drugs is a big issue in the Punjab right now.
And so is migration, because a lot of young people are just leaving and villages are getting emptied. And these are things that people know about, but they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to really acknowledge. So in August last year, we did on the 14th of August, because it was supposed to be Independence Day, or close to Independence Day, but we wanted to make it larger and talk about migration. So we talked about partition because that was a huge migration forced. We also talked about the Tibetans, and nobody could actually, before the program started, they couldn't make this connection between why did we want to bring the Tibetans into this whole issue of migration. The Tibetans are so close to Amritsar because they are in Dharamshala. And people go there to eat momos and whatever all the time, but you still don't see them as people, and you don't see them as people who lost a homeland much as you did. So those were the kinds of connections that we were trying to build at that time. And then we brought in this whole migration which is going on at present, and we showed a film about that. So it's also this whole thing of trying to open up. So when you talk about your local concerns, but also show people that it's actually bigger than what you see. So one more thing that I'd like to say here is this new thing that we're trying to do between the Northeast and the Northwest, because that's how I started with this Cultures of Peace Festival, which Mary talked about earlier. And so in the last one, the Sial Festival, the Winter Festival, we did one segment which was looking at borderlands, because both are borders, both are vulnerable borders that are constantly in the news. So we try to bring in borders from the northeastern states and the border in the west, which of course we do know about, and we had stories from both sides. And we also brought in a project that we did, knitting the two places together, which was looking at the Assamese Sikhs, since that incident in Shillong, which had just happened, was so much in the news in India. So we thought that was a good way of trying to tie in this thing. So it's just an effort of, the idea is also, it's not always just to confront, but it's also to grow bridges and to grow understanding. And that, I think, is what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Preeti. Just to give you a context, so Bhindranwale was a political person. He was the leader of a political movement which was supported by the then government. But then he turned and became a separatist and used violence to be able to do that, and ran a very, very effective campaign for many years across the Punjab. And much of it was actually funded, Jeff, by people in, as they say, Toronto, and from the UK, etc.
I was not.
Vancouver also. And today the revival of the separatist movement to a large extent, and they print their own currency, etc., is again primarily by the non-resident Indians. And I keep saying the non-resident Punjabis or the non-resident Gujaratis are very much like the non-resident Israelis, who from our arm's length distance are happy to fund all of this kind of stuff without necessarily understanding or suffering the consequences of it, which is again a big issue. Rima or Raghav, would you like to talk about Bhopal?
Maybe Raghav talks about Bhopal, and I can talk about something else. Yeah.
Bhopal Literature Festival, which started a few weeks ago. Recently born. Happy birthday and congratulations.
Thank you very much, all of you. And I started off my career as a civil servant, and I have also been published, thankfully. That justifies my dealing with literature. So we decided to do the Bhopal Literature Festival because I found a very deep and very deafening vacuum for literature in Bhopal, despite the fact that it had a very large variety of cultural programs being fed to people every day through various institutions, and we had either a drama or a Sangeet music festival function going in somewhere. But I thought there was need for people to have a dialogue and debate and discuss issues which was not happening. So we decided to form a society. I'm the president of that society. Rima is a member. She kindly agreed to be a member of that society, and we've had thoughts and inputs coming in from Namita and Sanjoy whenever our society people, my partner in crime there, Meeraji, talking to him. And I've been tracking that. We had a very successful small festival for 3 days, 3 parallel sessions. We want to make it more compact, more of a boutique event in literature, and confine it to discussions, dialogues and debates on literature, on subjects which are not regularly covered, which may involve mainstream authors. Did we have difficulties? Yes, we did. Right from the day one in choosing authors. So we had issues coming up whether this person would fit into the ethos of the city Bhopal or not with the government that we. And closer to the event, when we took the venue, which was a governmental cultural complex, we had the government of the day, and despite they being my close colleagues and agreeing to support, saying that such and such author should not really be called. and we had to really convince them and tell them that, look, this guy has written several books, and because he's written books, he merits being called, and they acceded to our this thing. Later, when the government changed and we had elections, so just a couple of weeks before the festival, the government changed. The new people in the culture department said, and just the very people whom the other government was feeling very happy about being invited, they were feeling very disgusted about being invited. And once again, we assuaged their suspicions and we managed to pull along. It went off very well. The key learning there is that governments have to make it explicit that they will support freedom of expression. And I think Sanjay and Namita, if you can bring out a Jaipur declaration to the effect that all writers everywhere should be encouraged to speak, to write what they want to, and for literature festivals to encourage them to speak what they want to, and the governments of the day not to interfere in any way, but to support writers to come out with their originality. I think that would be a very positive step in the right direction. Thanks.
It's unlikely ever to happen. Says a person sitting here has got a case of sedition against him, so Rima. The Bhopal festival is set against the lake in this wonderful complex called Bharat Bhavan. It's absolutely stunning.
So, I think I'm one of the few frauds here, except that our recent Bhopal Literature Festival has given me more of a position, because I'm definitely involved with that. I'm also peripherally involved with the Chandigarh Military Literature Festival, simply because they have enough army people, they have enough memoirs. They also want to dig deep into the past. And I love to say I'm a lapsed archaeologist, I have a PhD in that, but I've been teaching history for a long time, I have that legitimacy. So for Chandigarh, again, I think the issues have not been anything like the ones you've faced. I will now come to the one I've been most involved with, again, sort of marginally, but not quite, because I've been here since the time the Jaipur Literature Festival started. It's only now that I use Jaipur Literature Festival, because in my mind I was very, cussedly using only the Lit Fest, because it was a Lit Fest, but it's not. It's always been this wonderful coming together. And one or two things, they've made me to say this. This is the sort of thing you could have said before. You can't now, because somebody will say, where is it coming from? Is that the Jaipur Lit Fest has always been evolving. And that is something that Raghav and we were discussing, what we took when we said, this is what's worked for them, this is what's worked for someone else. We will decide what we are doing. But I've seen the way it has evolved. The fact that you were inviting people knowing that there would be objections because they belong to a certain political persuasion or a certain country, or have written something and you stood by it. And I think that has been, along with the learning that as you grow up, the world is not a perfect place, but we can try and make it better, was this, that people need to stand up, and when it's your friends and buddies, you need to support them. Thank you for really driving home that point, because when they came for protesting Salman Rushdie, we were having a session somewhere, and that roar by that crowd, could be heard way in the Darbar Hall, and you were facing it. And the fact that so many of your Teamworks people were ready to rush out to your rescue, even though they're young people, says a lot for the way we can come together. The other things that I really want to refer to, because we've had people speaking from Indore and parts of other parts of this country, and it probably applies to other parts of the world, is that an interest in art, literature, culture, in expressing yourself has always been there. Someone just mentioned, I think Namita, you did, about having Salima Hashmi over. This famous poet of the Indian subcontinent, who had written something which roughly translates as speak, because your lips are free. They're not always free in today's circumstances, but literature festivals allow those writings to be heard, even when the voice is silenced because it's been time that they've passed on, or because they're physically silenced by being put in jail. So that was the other thing coming. But the realization that came to me was, having grown up in Jaipur, and I think Pariksith's got postcards from my father. My father used to write postcards to a lot of people, including to Faith Singh, which is how the very first of the literature components got added to a city festival that Faith was doing at that time. And those were more or less, safe things, except that with literature, is anything ever a safe thing? And people like my father, he'd be mortified at my bringing him up only because of the way I'm referring to him, but people like him of his generation, because they did not have too many forums, but they read. I mean, he was an old-time Lahore pre-partition student who used to go out and do a lot of work, again, for the freedom of the country, but he was a leftist and did all kinds of activities that got the police attention on him. But he also ran the Sangam Press for a while. What he would do is have a small get-together in our home, sometimes every year, depending on if he had the funds, and would say to people, bring your books in, let's talk about them. So it was like a book fair, but it was a personalized or a low-key book fair. My point is, this had been going on in different parts of the country. So there would be small gatherings. There would be, of course, proper the mushaira or the music thing, or a Kavi Sammelan, which are poets getting together. But this activity, I think, maybe 1950s was part of India. Gradually, that had a decline. Nobody really wanted to have locals talking to each other. But I think what has happened with the coming of the literature festival, and really the pioneering efforts made in India, wherever you're getting your inspiration from, and it's been wonderful hearing all our colleagues today. So I realize I'm really learning so much. Is that a platform has once again been accorded. Even the alternate festival, they're using another word, I think Samanta, which really means equivalent, which is great. I mean, isn't that the whole idea? You don't have a fringe festival, you have a celebration. You have a celebration of books, of the word, and of culture. And I think that is really where I want to end, that I'm fortunate to have been part of this. I'm fortunate to have seen my colleagues stand up against the voices of others being censored. I've also seen the after effect. So on the last day, when everybody is having a writer's ball and enjoying themselves, I've had some local bureaucrats say to me, you mentioned the cases and things, saying, shall I put your friends in jail? And I said, what have my friends done? And I'm kind of saying, which ones does he mean? Is it somebody I've been hanging out with? Does he mean these guys? I hope he doesn't mean these guys. And he says, yes, I'm the local district commissioner, divisional commissioner. I can at least have them in lockup overnight. And I said, and he's having a meal while he's doing this. I said, come on, I'm sure. He says, yes, but technically I can. We will not let that happen. We cannot let that happen.
Thank you, Rehman. Just to welcome Vincent, thank you so much for coming, and we have our lunch after this, but I'll come to you in a second. Is Sabine here? A big apology, having said yes to come to your festival, having said no again, having said yes, and I'm sorry. 1 year I will, I promise you.
Thank you. I'm from the southernmost part of India. Perhaps ours is the southernmost literary festival in India, in Trivandrum. I don't know if anything else is coming up in probably Kanyakumari. My name is Sabin, I'm a director. And thank you for having me over here. And a couple of things, and I'm through. One is our festival is, we were talking about boycotting, and unfortunately we were in the eye of a storm, like a Me Too storm. One of my colleagues had to, a director, had to step down because he was called out in Me Too. And even though Madhrubhumi is a very large media organization into the 9th decade, they always had this zero tolerance towards sexual harassment against women. But we were a little bit late in putting out a statement on the website. By the time I'd lost 3 authors who I really wanted at the festival, and it's like a stab at my heart. I worked really hard. We all worked really hard to get authors in, but then because of that, and I'm really sad at that point. I don't know how to deal with all that. we were a bit late in putting out a statement on. By the time they went on the Facebook, they tweeted and said putting out and all that. Before, it could set a trend. You know, when someone is pulling out, they say, I'm also pulling out. I mean, that's sad. Second, yeah, we need to strike a balance between political conversation and literature. And this time we've tried. The theme is known lands, unheard voices. And we try to bring in the voices that are not heard in Kerala from different parts of the world. And we have around 40 foreign speakers this time, and over about 320 speakers altogether. It's our second edition, and I think we're growing. It's a bit chaotic as well. And I'm still getting calls when I'm on my sessions, and it's just a week from now. So I confirmed the last minute, whether I didn't know I could come over. So I'm still getting the sessions and all that, so that's it. So, but we're focusing on literature part of it. We're trying to engage with youth. We will work roadshows from one end of the state to the other end of the, because it's backed by Madhurabhumi's big organization, I can afford to have all that. We have roadshows from one southern end to the northern end, where they will stop at every selected towns and read short stories and poems and all. And we have literature quizzes across campuses. We are trying to engage the youth and try to strike a balance between this political rhetoric and literature, which is the heart of it. We create an ambience. At the venue, we are trying to create an ambience of reading and writing. We're trying out something, so please do come. And
so just to say that Kerala is one of the most beautiful states, and it's also 100% literate, the only 100% literate state in India. And best wishes. I know you've been through a trial by fire, and I promise you I haven't cancelled because of the Me Too issue. I would have been very happy to come. Unfortunately, my schedules are not my own.
But by the way, you two been there because Hay was there, so you know this.
They've been there for the
yes. I mean, it's in the same place. I mean, the same palace.
AhdafSoueif Palace, which was our home for the collaboration we had with Hay Festival when we first came to Trivandrum many years ago. Best of luck, Sabine. Thank you so much for being here. Just before your festival, best wishes. Is Sian here from the Dalkey Book Festival? Sian is here. Smita, I saw Smita just now. Smita, come. I mean, we'll finish in another 10 minutes. Okay, we all have to.
Hi everyone. Jaipur Literature and Jaipur Literature Festival, what a coincidence. Because I started my literary journey from Jaipur by receiving an award at the age of 15 years by the Rajasthan Sahitya Academy. And that was the big moment for me because Sahitya Academy normally usually gives award on a manuscript, and which is still not published. And after that, immediately I received an award by the Maharana Mewar Foundation because I'm also, I was from Udaipur at that time, I was studying there. Then my life took me to Bombay, and where I started and initiated this beautiful literature and culture festival called LitoFest Mumbai. LitoFest Mumbai is not only a literature festival, it is also art, music and the culture of the country. And we promote all these genres of art, culture, literature all together on one platform. The festival's USP was to support a lot of aspiring authors, which we initiated through a manuscript contest from the first year itself. So we ran this contest for 3 months and we got an overwhelming response by receiving around 300 manuscripts from almost teenager authors from all across the globe. And we selected and we published 5 books during the first year itself. Fortunately, we got support of the government, unlike the other festivals. The smart thing what we did is we made these bureaucrats, the principal secretaries, people from police, income tax, etc., festival supporters. So we gave them the position of festival supporters. So we never had, we always had the support of the government. We get humongous support from the Chief Minister and Chief Minister's wife, the Tourism Minister of Maharashtra, Mr. JayapriyaVasudevan, the Culture Secretary, everybody, they give us funding also. And but no interference, since we have a very, very strong advisory board, and we decide what we want to present. And fortunately, Mumbai is a very, very diverse and a multicultural city, and people in politics or bureaucracy they have a lot other things to do rather than coming and interfering in a beautiful literature and culture festival. So all we get there is their blessings and support. And due to that support itself, we managed a London chapter last year of LitoFest Mumbai in London. And there's another very beautiful initiative which we have started through LitoFest, is bridging the gap between the literacy and the literature. So we have now almost 300 or more literature festivals in the country. But what is happening in the rural part of the country is not even proper systems or support for the education. So we started by adopting a rural village and a rural school, and we managed to finish this one rural village which we adopted in Dahigaon in Maharashtra. It's around 2.5 hours from Mumbai, and we managed to support the school by setting up the entire school ourselves. We supported them by gifting them an entire library, so all the kids are reading all the books from the world. So now, talking about the challenges, the challenge which we definitely are facing is of sponsors. And I am sure with your expertise and your expertise, Sanjay, you would definitely guide us how to really face this challenge. Because what so far which we are doing is with the support of the MTDC over there and some sponsor. But I would want to go ahead and adopt more rural schools and give more platform to the aspiring authors. So this is the only platform where the legendary author and the aspiring authors get on equal stage. And so far, during the last 5 years, we have managed to publish almost 35 books of the aspiring authors, and the number is still growing. Thank you so much.
We can have a chat on that. Is Vikas Singh here from the Marathi Festival? Otherwise, we'll go straight to Vincent. If you can tell us a little bit about. Oh, you have one. And then we have one last author, speaker after that is Will, if Will is still here. Will's here.
So just to say thank you to have inviting me. And so I am the French president of the publishers and also the president of the Paris Book Fair. So we have invited India in 2020. So we are very proud of that because it's a true challenge to not to invite only India from books, but books from India, but also to invite all India and to understand more about India for the 200,000 people, French, more and more younger in France, that they come in the book fair. And because of the social media, we have more and more young people and people from school coming there. And we have working on the convergence of books. We have to adapt all contents also for other media. And we organize one day during the fair with one-to-one meetings from between the publishers and the producers for animation or movies, that they could see some history from literature in the main end, but also the comic books. So it works very well, and now we have 100 of books options taken by producers to transform it in movie. And when we do that, we give to authors real strength and also to export in other languages. And I I have been president for 10 years, and we are invited more and more from foreign countries, and we have now 60 countries coming, and it's not only to translate books in French, but also to organize meetings for the publishers. Yes.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to our conversation over lunch today and the partnership for next year's the festival. And welcome to this is your first time that you're coming to the Jaipur Festival. So I think on behalf of Namita and all of us, welcome here, and hopefully we can all work together to make this happen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Will, one last.
Hi everyone, I won't keep you, I know lunch is waiting. So I'm from the Emerging Writers Festival. We're a festival in Melbourne, Australia. We've been running for about 16 years now. And we're quite different to a number of literature writers festivals in that we're primarily a festival for writers. So our audience and our artists are both primarily writers. It ranges from about 75% to 90% who identify as writers, depending on the event. And we're very much about building the next generation of Australian storytellers and voices. So we kind of do that in twofold ways. During the day, a lot of our events are very much professional development for writers. So we run masterclasses, workshops, we run a writers' conference. And then in the evening, we run literary salons, performance events to a broader audience of literature and arts lovers. And that's very much about giving emerging writers a platform to find new audiences. So we have become quite recognised in terms of our ability to discover new talent, and thinking about some of the challenges and this kind of idea about political challenges. Our content isn't so much political, but what is political is we're very frank in our prioritisation of marginalised voices. So as some of the other Australian delegates have said today, the publishing industry and the writing industry in Australia is very white. And we still sort of see ourselves at the coalface of changing that. So in finding all of the artists to feature in the festival, we're very much about making sure that we prioritise culturally and linguistically diverse writers, Indigenous writers, people with a disability, etc. Something that we do find challenging in that, though, is that obviously we're a very small team, and working to a festival cycle means things happen very quickly. And when you work with communities, you really need that deep and long-term engagement, and that is something that we do find quite challenging. It's all well and good to say, we want to feature an event full of deaf writers, say, but those deaf writers might not go, well, why are we coming and being part of your festival? You're not for us. So that's something that we're really conscious of, and make sure that we do try and work with those communities over a longer period of time. I think another challenge also, while we do see a change happening in our artists and in our audience, our staff are still very culturally homogenous, and so something that I've been really trying to focus on in the last few years of my job is trying to change that. And I think the arts industry and the literature industry is still very white in terms of the workers, and then the further up you go in the hierarchy, the more white they are, and so really trying to look at that change at an executive and a board level as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. Thank you all very much. A big apology, everything that we have right now is all backed up through software. And I think some of your your festival cards, I know Jeff's was a problem, I know Cherilyn's was a problem, doesn't allow you access to, I think, lunch or the music stage or whatever. So the cards have been redone. So many apologies, and love you to be part of everything, and they will give you the cards at the end of it. Thank you very much for being here. That was a great sharing. We'll put some of this together, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the press. What time? That's a very intelligent question. Nobody said. Do we know what time, Sam? Do we know what time it is tomorrow? No, we'll send out a round robin mail later today. I'll check. Okay. Yeah, we'll check. Yeah. We'll put it in the book. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
We thank our speakers, and we request